The wind howled through the dry desert as Jack Matthews worked on his ranch, the harsh sun beating down on his weathered face. He had always preferred the solitude of his land, finding comfort in the quiet stretches of the open plains. The small cabin he lived in was all he needed, surrounded by the fields he worked daily. But as much as Jack enjoyed the peace of his life, there were moments when the loneliness crept in, reminding him of the family he had lost years ago. It was late in the evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, when Jack realized how cold it had become. The desert nights were always colder than expected, and even the warmth from his fire couldn't seem to chase away the chill. He was sitting by the hearth, lost in thought, when he heard something. The sound was faint at first, just a rustling, but it was enough to alert him. Jack stood up, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his hip. He hadn't seen anyone for miles, so the sound felt out of place. Then in the dim light of the cabin he saw her, a woman standing in the shadows, her figure barely visible. Jack's heart skipped a beat. She was tall, her hair dark and tangled from the wind, but it was the eyes that caught his attention. They shone with a quiet strength, and for a moment Jack forgot to breathe. The woman stepped closer, her movements hesitant but determined. She was clearly trying to stay out of sight, but Jack's gaze never left her. His mind raced, trying to make sense of her presence. Was she a wanderer lost in the cold? A traveler seeking shelter from the night? Or something more? She spoke then, her voice soft but steady. "I mean no harm," she said, her words carrying a calmness that seemed to settle the tension in the room. Jack didn't know what to say. He studied her carefully, noting her weathered clothes and the weariness in her posture. She was alone and she was in need of help. "You look like you could use some shelter," Jack said, his voice low, almost gruff. He didn't trust easily, but there was something about this woman that made him feel like he had no choice but to offer her a place by the fire. The woman nodded, stepping further into the room. Jack gestured to the chair near the fire. "Take a seat," he said. "I'll get you something warm." The woman hesitated for a moment before sitting down. Jack went to the small stove in the corner of the cabin, pulling out a kettle and setting it over the flame. As the water began to heat, he glanced back at the woman, who was watching him carefully, her gaze steady but not hostile. There was something guarded in her expression, as if she was used to being on her own, used to not trusting others. Jack couldn't help but wonder who she was and why she was here. She didn't look like someone who was just passing through. There was a strength to her, a confidence that didn't come from simple wanderlust. "I'm Jack Matthews," he said, breaking the silence. "This is my ranch." The woman nodded, her eyes flicking toward the door as if to ensure no one else was around. "Tala," she replied simply. "I don't mean to intrude. I just needed a place to stay for the night." Jack didn't press her for more details. He didn't need to know her entire story right now. The way she carried herself told him that she was used to surviving on her own, and he had no reason to make her feel uncomfortable. He poured hot water into 2 mugs and handed her one. She took it without a word, wrapping her hands around it as if she were grateful for the warmth. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable. Jack sat back down in his own chair, his eyes flicking to the door for a moment. He knew that in the wild, no good deed went unnoticed for long. But something about Tala's presence made him feel that he wasn't in danger. She wasn't here to cause trouble. She was here because she needed help. And Jack had always been one to offer that when he could. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending little sparks up into the chimney. Tala sat across from him, sipping her tea in silence. Jack could see the fatigue in her posture, the way her shoulders seemed to sag under some invisible weight. She was strong, no doubt, but there was a vulnerability to her, one that Jack recognized from his own life. After a few moments, Tala spoke again, her voice softer this time. "The night's cold out there. I didn't know where else to go." Jack nodded, understanding. "It can get cold out here," he said. "The desert's like that. It'll burn you by day and freeze you by night." Tala gave a small nod, her eyes glancing toward the fire. "I've learned to survive in it. But even the strongest need help sometimes." Jack wasn't sure why, but her words struck him. Maybe it was because he had spent so many years alone, trying to handle everything on his own. The idea of accepting help, of depending on someone else, was foreign to him. But this woman, Tala, she didn't seem to hesitate. She had found her way to him, and though he didn't fully understand why, he couldn't help but feel that helping her was the right thing to do. As the night stretched on, Jack found himself drawn to her. not just out of curiosity but because of the quiet strength she exuded. It wasn't just the way she had survived alone. It was the way she carried herself as though the hardships she had faced were nothing but another part of her journey. She wasn't defeated by them. She had learned from them. Tala finished her tea and set the mug down on the small table. Jack noticed that her eyes had drifted to the bed in the corner of the room. It was the warmest spot in the cabin, and he realized with a small pang of guilt that it was also the only place she could sleep. Jack stood up, moving toward the bed. "I've got an extra blanket," he said, feeling awkward. "You can use it." Tala didn't seem to hesitate. She simply nodded and stood up as well. Her movements were graceful, almost cat-like, as she made her way to the bed. But as she reached the blanket, she paused, looking at Jack with a thoughtful expression. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jack nodded. He didn't need thanks. He was just doing what any decent man would do. But there was something in the way she said it, something in her eyes that made him feel like she wasn't just thanking him for shelter. She was thanking him for something deeper, something unspoken. As Tala settled onto the bed, Jack returned to his seat by the fire, his thoughts racing. There was something about this woman, something that stirred a feeling inside him he hadn't experienced in a long time. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt it in the air. The way she made him feel, like she was a part of something he had been missing for years, was unsettling. He sat there staring into the fire, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside him. And as the fire burned low, Jack Matthews realized that his life, so quiet and solitary, had just been changed forever by the unexpected arrival of an Apache woman seeking warmth. The morning light crept into the small cabin, casting soft shadows across the room. Jack Matthews woke with a start, his mind still groggy from the deep sleep he had finally managed to get. For a moment he wasn't sure where he was, but as he opened his eyes fully he remembered. Tala, the Apache woman, had come into his cabin last night seeking warmth. He had offered her a place by the fire, and she had ended up in his bed to escape the cold. Jack sat up slowly, the creaking of the bed disturbing the stillness. He glanced over at the corner of the room where Tala had settled. The bed was empty. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly scanned the room. She wasn't there. He jumped to his feet, his boots hitting the floor with a soft thud. He hurried to the door, half expecting to find her gone, but there she was, sitting on the porch just outside. Tala's dark hair fluttered gently in the wind, and she was staring out at the empty plains, lost in her thoughts. She looked so peaceful, so at ease, as if the world didn't weigh her down. Jack stepped outside, trying not to disturb the silence between them. He didn't want to make her feel like she had done something wrong by being there. He could see the way she held herself, strong but quiet, like she had learned not to show vulnerability. The same way he had learned to keep his emotions hidden all these years. "Morning," Jack said quietly, his voice gruff from sleep. Tala turned her head, a faint smile crossing her face. "Morning," she replied softly. "I didn't want to wake you." Jack shook his head, brushing off her apology. "It's fine." "You didn't disturb me." She stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. "I hope I didn't overstay my welcome. I'll be on my way soon." Jack's heart sank at her words. He hadn't expected her to leave so soon. In fact, he didn't want her to go. The night had felt strangely comforting, having someone else in the cabin. He had gotten used to the quiet, but something about Tala's presence made him feel like he wasn't so alone anymore. She hadn't just warmed his cabin, she had warmed his heart in a way he hadn't even realized he needed. "You don't have to leave yet," Jack said quickly, his voice softer than usual. "It's still cold out there. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Tala seemed to hesitate for a moment, her gaze flickering to the ground before meeting his eyes. "I didn't want to impose," she said quietly. "I'm not used to staying in one place for long." Jack understood. He had always been the same way. The land was a place for men who could live alone, who could survive without needing anyone else. But there was something about Tala that made Jack want to change that. He wanted her to feel safe here, to know that she wasn't alone, even if it was just for a little while. "You're not imposing," Jack replied, his tone firm, though it was clear he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "You're not the first person to seek shelter here, and you won't be the last." Tala looked at him then, her eyes searching his face as if trying to figure out what he was really saying. She took a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate as though she wasn't sure how to cross the invisible line that existed between them. "You're different from the others," she said finally. "Most would have turned me away." Jack didn't know how to respond. He had never seen himself as different, just someone who tried to do what was right when he could. "I don't turn people away unless I have a reason to," he said simply. She nodded slowly as if she were processing his words. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried a chill that made Jack shiver, but the warmth between them seemed to keep him steady. He felt a connection to her, something he hadn't felt in a long time, and it made him feel exposed in a way he wasn't used to. "I'll stay for a little longer," Tala said, breaking the silence, "but only until the sun's high. I don't want to overstay my welcome." Jack nodded, relieved. "You can stay as long as you need." The two of them spent the morning together in a quiet, companionable silence. Jack went about his usual chores, checking the horses and making sure the cattle were well fed. Tala helped without being asked, her movements swift and practiced as she worked alongside him. She had an easy grace about her, the kind of grace that came from surviving the hardest of circumstances. Watching her, Jack realized that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She had made a life out of the harshest conditions, and now here she was, helping him on his ranch like it was the most natural thing in the world. They worked until midday, the sun rising higher in the sky, warming the earth beneath their feet. As the heat of the day settled in, they took a break by the cabin, sitting in the shade. Jack had never been one for long conversations, but with Tala, the words seemed to come easily. She didn't ask for much, just simple exchanges about their lives, their pasts, and the paths they had taken to get here. For the first time in years, Jack found himself sharing more than just the basics of his life. He talked about his family, about how they had died in a fire that destroyed his home years ago. Tala listened quietly, her gaze soft but intense, as if she understood the weight of his words without him needing to explain more. Tala, too, shared pieces of her own story, how she had been separated from her tribe, forced to live alone in the wilderness. She spoke of the hardships she had faced, the dangers of the desert and the loss of her people. There was a sadness in her voice, but also a strength that Jack admired. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was simply telling him the truth, as if it were just another part of her life. After a long pause, Jack finally broke the silence. "You've been through a lot." Tala gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Everyone has their battles," she said. "I've learned to face mine head on, but I don't always have to face them alone." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jack felt like she had just opened up a door to something he hadn't expected. She wasn't just surviving on her own. She was letting herself be part of something more, something real. Jack didn't know where this connection would lead. He didn't know if Tala would stay or leave, if their paths would cross again. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet activity. As the sun began to set, Jack and Tala sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them. There was something different now, something unspoken but understood between them. As Jack looked over at Tala, sitting by his fire, he knew that things had changed. His world, once silent and empty, had suddenly become full of possibilities, and in that moment he realized he didn't want to go back to how things were before. He wanted something more. He wasn't sure what that meant yet, but with Tala by his side, he was willing to find out.